Welcome to the Story Fulfilled podcast, where we deep dive into how each character and story in the Bible comes together to fulfill the story of God. I'm Fletcher.
I'm Abby.
And I'm Jay.
And today's story is about Pharaoh.
Pharaoh.
Oh baby, oh baby,
I love how
let
you
my
came up
people
with-
go.
We didn't even
did
say, hey,
not.
let's sing that cheesy 80s,
That was
90s.
great, 'cause we
And
didn't
that's
even-
before your time. Like that.
We sang
I
that
mean,
in
in
Sunday
camp
school,
and
man.
Sunday
We
school,
sang
yeah.
that.
All the time.
It was
Like,
Good song.
We actually, it was a legit worship song in our youth group when I was growing up.
Playing it at church.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
That's
And-
funny.
And somehow I still believed that my youth pastor was the coolest guy around.
Oh man, when I was, this may be off track, but weirdest song I've ever played at a youth retreat. Someone played "Firework" by Katy Perry as a legitimate worship song. They did it. They're like, okay, just listen to the words as we play this song. It was
Baby,
brutal.
you're a firework.
Oh yeah, and the worship band
Colors
sang
first.
it.
Yeah.
It was something else.
Wow.
Interesting.
So I was trying to think of a way to transition from that into the question, and I don't have one. So there we go. Question. Pharaoh. Pharaoh, when we think of Pharaoh and Egypt and ancient artifacts, what ancient artifact would you like to have in your collection?
From
Assuming you
Egypt
have a
or like
collection.
just anywhere?
Anywhere.
Anywhere?
I think
Okay.
it's just anywhere.
right.
I approached the question upon seeing it as
Anyway.
Egyptian, but
If you can name an Egyptian artifact, that'd be impressive anyway.
Well,
let alone
yeah.
Okay, Fletcher, do you have one?
Well, what I said before we started is from Night at the Museum, the tablet of Akhmun-Ra. But if we want to go for
Which is Egyptian.
which is Egyptian, and it like made all the museum guys come to life at night.
Right.
But I don't think that's real. So I can't. It has to be real? Because otherwise I'm going with that. I think
it
we should
doesn't-
do real.
Well,
Real.
Okay, good, because I don't know if mine's real or not. Mine is the Orb of Isis, which was found in the Springstonian Museum that Lisa and Homer fell upon, and they broke into the museum, and Homer accidentally knocked it over, and it broke open. But then they realized that it was actually a music box playing a beautiful song that had not been heard in 4,000 years. And as Lisa thanked her father for giving her this experience, the security guards came and chased them away.
Nice. Okay.
So I don't know if it's actually real or not, but that was the first thing that came to mind when I saw Artifact.
Okay, I think I'm gonna go with a piece of manna
Okay.
Piece of
from
manna.
the Ark of the Covenant
Ark of the
Do you
because
think
I
it'd be moldy by now, or?
I don't think so because I feel like the Ark of the Covenant's gonna protect things. I don't know. It's a holy thing. It's a God thing. So then I can taste it. I'm
Taste the
curious
manna.
about what manna tastes like.
Yeah.
All right.
All right. That's
Not the
our-
whole Ark of the Covenant with everything in
No,
it.
just the manna.
Just the
Just
manna.
the manna. I wonder if you were to taste it, if your first reaction would be, "What is this?"
Yeah,
Maybe, 'cause
fluffy.
Because that's what
Or
manna actually
I want
means.
quail as well.
Oh yeah.
No,
Yeah.
I don't want quail. I'm passing that one. All right. Well, we'd love to hear your answers. So feel free to email us at story@bfmc.org or send us a message on Instagram.
Yeah. So last week we talked about Abraham, Hagar, and Ishmael, and that was around the time of the founding of the nation of Israel, or at least the forming of the nation of Israel. And so today we're moving forward to the time of Moses. So Abraham had a son who had a son who had 12 sons, and they ended up in Egypt, and they're actually there for 400 years since the time of Joseph, and Joseph being Abraham's great grandson, the
Like
son
Joseph in the Technicolor
of Joseph.
Dreamcoat.
Yes, that Joseph.
Yeah.
How Technicolor do you think? I mean,
They can't have had that many colors
I
back
mean, if
then.
it
it was
Donny
many. It says it was
Osmond.
many colors, right? Yes, the Donny Osmond. So it's been 400 years since Donny Osmond was in Egypt. So Joseph in Egypt, 400 years, and a new leader rises up in Egypt who didn't know the Israelites, and that's actually what leads us into our story today, where we find ourselves.
So the date of the Exodus, which is what we're talking about, is another hotly debated subject, just like the date of Abraham.
I love that we actually highlight a number of hotly debated subjects and
don't answer
we
it.
don't answer.
Well, it's not
Not
like
the role of our podcast.
Useless.
If we were scholars and archaeologists, we'd give you an answer, but
Right.
we're not. So we're not going to claim to know all the answers.
Right.
Anyway, there are two dates that are the most commonly put forward for the date of the Exodus. One of them is 1446 BC, and the other one is around 1225 BC. The 1446 date uses the numbers in the books of First Kings and Judges, and it kind of counts back, and that would make the pharaoh we're talking about Amenhotep
Easy for you
II
to say.
and Thutmose I would be the two kind of pharaohs in that time.
Right.
Or if it's at around 1225, the date is based on other interpretations and some archaeology and things like that. And the pharaoh of that time would have been Ramses II.
Right. Do we have, just as we talk about it being hotly debated, is there a leaning among scholars? Is there like a majority view versus a minority view as to one or the other, or is it pretty much down the middle?
When I was reading some of my, like doing my research in geography stuff, and even in school, most of people leaned more towards the 1446 date.
Okay.
What's funny is that the 1225 date's actually the one that the movie The Prince of Egypt is based off. You'll hear Pharaoh Ramses there, but there is some really specific evidence about why it probably is not that one.
Yeah, there's mostly it's archaeology and the naming of the city of Ramses in the book of Exodus that points towards 1225 as a later date, and 1446 is really calculating off the biblical dates.
Right.
But
Okay.
yeah, there's a bunch of different things. You'll have to look it up.
Yeah, so actually one of the things that when I was doing my research that kind of leads towards this is Josephus named Pharaoh's daughter in one of his writings. So I'll actually I'll put a link in the notes for that and what he called her. And so there are some things where, like, okay, if it's that daughter and that's Josephus who said it was Thermuthis, then she is the daughter of one of the ones in the 1446. So, and
Josephus just is a Jewish historian around the 1st century AD.
Right. So quite a while after the actual event.
So it could be wrong. He could be wrong.
But he's considered to be the most trusted 1st century historian.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there will be a link in the show notes for that. So obviously the location of the story is in Egypt, and it does kind of depend a little bit on which date it happened. Most people agree that the Exodus crossing would have been more north of the Red Sea in the Gulf of Suez, which does flow directly into the Red Sea. And the translation of the Bible is the Sea of Reeds. So it makes more sense in relation to the pyramids, which we know that the Israelites worked on, and how long it would actually take the Israelites to walk across. I looked up how far, Thebes is the city of kings, which is the other kind of option that it could have been. But the part where Thebes is located, it's farther from the Red Sea itself, and it's a way wider part of the Red Sea. Whereas Alexandria and Cairo, Cairo specifically, is closer to the Gulf of Suez, and it was a closer walk for the Israelites, so they could have escaped. The timeline just makes a little more sense.
I also did notice when I was reading one of the chapters in Exodus, when they were talking about which direction they went, it says they didn't take the path towards the Philistines because it would lead them towards war. Right. And God didn't want them to go through war, and they'd think they'd turn back to Egypt. So they took a longer path through the Red Sea. Yeah,
so again, it's not 100% sure, but it just does say the Red Sea or the Sea of Reeds.
Yeah.
And also many scholars agree that the Nile Delta, which Moses was pulled out of, has shifted a lot over time. Right. And so that also makes this story kind of hard to pinpoint exactly where it is, which that story is part of our story today.
So with all that information that you've just got, that I'm sure is going to be a pain to remember, let's start the story. So it actually starts off pretty gruesome and sad. The Hebrews are enslaved in Egypt, like we said, and they've been just treated terribly and are worked incredibly hard. The Pharaoh at the time thinks that the Hebrews are getting overpopulated, they're getting too much, and they might grow too powerful and end up, running away and revolting. So the Pharaoh then commands all his people that every Hebrew son that is born, you'll throw into the Nile or kill them. So it's very sad. So at one point, a Levite woman gives birth to a son, and she's able to hide him for, I think it's like 3 months. But when she can't hide him anymore, she gets this basket and puts some pitch and waterproofs it and sends him down the river. The Pharaoh's daughter actually finds the little baby in the basket in the river and taking pity on him, and she keeps him as her own son.
Right.
She then gives him, or she knows this is a Hebrew. She knows it's not an Egyptian baby. She realizes this is a Hebrew and sends him back to her people to be raised. And then when he's, I think, like 8 years old or something like that, he goes back and learns from the Egyptians and grows up there as Pharaoh's daughter.
Right.
So this is actually the guy named Moses who we've been talking about. So Moses is raised as the son of the Pharaoh's daughter. And we can't actually tell the whole Moses story, but to skip forward, Moses ends up killing an Egyptian for whipping a Hebrew slave. And then he gets caught and runs away.
Right.
And he goes to the land of Midian where he gets married and has a family. And while there, he actually meets God in the burning bush, which is a very famous story. And we've told it, I think, on the podcast a little bit. But God basically gives him a job and tells him who he is, who God is, and says, go back to Egypt. I'm going to set my people free. Go back and lead the people out of Egypt.
Right.
And that's Moses' job. And he returns to Egypt, and it's 40 years later.
Yeah.
So Moses has been called by God by that burning bush, and he is headed back to Egypt.
And different Pharaoh at this time.
Right. So it basically says, Pharaoh dies and the new Pharaoh comes in, which is cool. I think, what's the show? There's a Bible show that I watched, and it's like it portrayed it. No, not The Chosen.
Different time.
I think it's just the Bible, one of the shows. But they did it because Moses was raised by the Pharaoh's daughter. They said they depicted it basically. Moses's half brother or adopted brother would have been the Pharaoh's son.
That was the Prince of Egypt.
Right.
They did that.
Maybe. There you go. Okay.
And I think actually that's highlighted in there was another movie. It was somewhat contentious. People had a really hard time with it.
The Ten Commandments?
Exodus, Sons,
Gods and Kings or something.
Kings. Yeah. But it actually really highlighted the human relationship that existed between Moses and the Pharaoh, and the difficulty that Moses would have actually had in watching it all unfold and like seeing God pour out wrath. I'm giving spoilers away, but seeing God pour out wrath on the Egyptian people as well, and not wanting to see that and having compassion for the people because he was one of them. Yeah, he was numbered among them.
Yeah,
kind of, right. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
So Moses now is told to go in front of this new Pharaoh and tell him to let his people go. Moses is scared and asks his brother Aaron to come speak with him, and God, sets that up. So Moses goes in front of Pharaoh with his brother Aaron, and they say, "Let my people go." This is what God says, "Let my people go." Pharaoh's answer is asking, who the heck is this God?
Right.
And why should I obey him? I don't know him. No, I'm not going to let my slaves
go. He really had not heard of this, of Yahweh God at all.
No.
Or why would he care about some slave god?
Yeah,
essentially.
But I would have thought that even if you don't, Israel was a huge nation, you would think that he would have heard of it at least.
Right, in which that indicates a problem, because the people, the Israelites are not the Hebrews at the time, I guess, are not retelling God's story and not recognizing the ways that he is at work, the ways that he's providing for them, all of that. Which is interesting because they got there because of God's provision, right? Joseph even says, you to his brothers, what you meant for harm, God used for good. And so it's telling and maybe troubling that he doesn't know who God is.
So yeah, instead of listening to Moses, the Pharaoh makes it actually worse for the Hebrews. He makes their slave jobs incredibly difficult.
Takes the straw away,
He takes the straw. He says, "Okay, instead of us giving you straw for the bricks that you're then going to make, you're going to go collect your own straw, and then you're going to make the bricks, and you're going to
double the output.
Nothing late. Same amount of work.
Awesome.
Same amount of time. good luck.
Yeah.
And he's like, we're going to whip you if you don't do it right.
There were no unions back then.
No. So the Hebrews are obviously not happy at Moses. They're like, what have you done? Why are you doing this to us? You're just making it worse. So Moses asked God, why have you done this? It's just made everything worse. So God goes back to Moses and he, restates his promise that he would deliver the Israelites out of Egypt.
Yeah.
And that's something that Moses is constantly hearing from God. Like, that's the promise, is that he will deliver them out of Egypt. God actually then tells Moses that he will harden Pharaoh's heart and there will be great acts of judgment on Egypt, and that he will know that God is the true God.
Right.
And then he gave Moses and his brother Aaron the signs to show Pharaoh that he is God and to deliver them.
Yeah.
So they go back to Pharaoh once again and they say, let my people go. And the Pharaoh's like, nope. So Moses and Aaron has this staff and he throws it on the ground and it turns into a snake. And this is one of the signs that God had given them.
Right.
And then what happened is Pharaoh calls up his magicians and his, sorcerers and stuff. And they're actually able to recreate this and throw their staffs down and create a snake as well. Yeah. And it says that Aaron's snake swallowed all the other snakes. So
which to me, if I'm like, oh, cool, look, yeah, you did this trick, but so can our magicians or whatever. But then when I see the other snake eating there, I'm like, oh, ours
maybe there's a little bit more. Yeah, right? Yeah, exactly. So then, Moses is asking again, let my people go. And this is when you've heard of the 9 plagues of Egypt. And then that's what starts happening, these acts of judgment. So these plagues, I'm going to just name them out. We're not going to tell the story of each one.
Right.
Let me see. They turned the Nile into blood. There was a plague of frogs, a plague of gnats, a plague of flies. Then all the Egyptian livestock died. There was a plague of sickness and boils. And then hail, and then locusts. And then the last one was that there was just darkness in the land for 3 days.
3 days. That's
right.
An interesting number.
Yeah. Darkness for 3 days. And then there's a cool thing. If you look at all the plagues of Egypt, they actually relate to these Egyptian gods, and they show that the God of the Hebrews, the God of the Israelites, has authority over all of this instead of those Egyptian gods. And the most powerful example was the killing of the sun, or not, the darkness from the sun for 3 days, which was basically just in the face of their god named Ra, who is the sun god.
The sun
and they're
god,
saying, look, this is the God Most High. This is in charge. And every time Pharaoh was asked, let my people go, he refused over and over and over again. His heart was hardened and he refused. So then God told Moses, there's going to be one last plague, and then they're going to be allowed to leave. This is what's going to happen. God would kill the firstborn of everything in Egypt, both men, women, livestock. The firstborn would die. And then he said, look, this is what you're going to have to do for the Hebrews. To kill a lamb and paint their doorpost with the blood, and then they will be spared. The angel of death is going to pass over their door if they partake in this slaughter of the lamb. And this is actually what's called Passover, and it's one of the biggest festival, I guess, in Israel and in Jewish culture. But that's where it comes from, is the angel was passed over the Hebrews. So the night came, and God ends up killing all the firstborn in Egypt except for the ones who were covered by the blood of the lamb. So that very night, Pharaoh, who lost his son, summoned Moses and tells him to leave. Get out, take your people, take your things, go worship your God, leave. Leave. I don't want to do with you. I never want to see you again. And then, so they go and they're rushing, they're leaving, and they're all getting out. And then God then leads the Israelites away toward the Red Sea. And it says they followed a pillar of fire by night and a pillar of clouds by day.
Right.
And that's when God was leading them through the wilderness towards the Red Sea. So while they were camped there at the Red Sea, the Pharaoh kind of changes his mind, thinking, why did we let these people go?
Yeah.
He doesn't learn very much, eh?
Yeah. Like, maybe you should just let them go.
Let them go. You saw what happened when you didn't.
Yeah.
I guess he was just so stubborn and he's mad, angry, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
And he thinks, why'd we let them go? We need to go get them back. We need to bring our slaves back. So he brought all his army and his chariots. There was like hundreds of chariots. And he brought all his army to go chase after them. And this is the crazy part. The miracle part happens. God talks to Moses and he says, raise up your staff and I will split the Red Sea, the Reed Sea,
Right.
and you will walk across dry land. So the Israelites all follow Moses down through the Red Sea, through dry land, the Reed Sea. Again, we don't know where it is. Anyway, they walk right through dry land. And then as soon as they cross to the other side, the Egyptians continue chasing through this split water.
Right.
And it says there were walls of water on each side.
Yeah.
They follow in.
Yeah. That's smart.
If I'm seeing somebody's God splitting water for them, and then they chase them through the water. As soon as the last Israelite crossed to the other side, it says the waters crashed in and drowned the armies of Egypt.
Yeah.
Whew. And
Wow.
they died. Yeah, and then, I want to read the last verse. I'm going to pull it up real quick. But keep talking amongst yourselves. I like the last verse.
Well, what I find interesting about this story is the untold story that's there. Like there's when we're looking at narrative especially in the Old Testament, there's a lot that's happening that we don't actually read about. And what we don't see is the instruction is not explicitly that this is only for the Hebrews who have the marking on their doors. It's anyone. And I think in my reading of the Bible, there's room for Egyptians to have seen what's going on, to see God at work around them, in the plagues and everything that's happening. Similar to later on in the story, and we talked about this in season 1 with Rahab, who said, like, we have seen what God is doing, and we have a fear and a reverence for God. So there's room for that in this story, so that there could possibly be Egyptians who are numbered.
It didn't say just the Hebrews will be saved. It said anyone who has the blood on the doorpost.
And
right?
so I would pray that if I were an Egyptian and I saw what was going on, I would find my Hebrew neighbor and say, what must I do to be saved? Right? Like just to ask that question. And so I like that. Sometimes I like reading into the untold story to uncover that, because that's a consistency in who God is, I think. So,
thinking of that, I don't want to preemptively answer Abby's question of how does this, but the Passover and the whole story of the Passover is really an image of Jesus saving blood, right? That the idea of Jesus as the Savior is imaged or pictured in the Passover, and we see that not only the Jews were saved, not only the Hebrews were saved, but anybody who was covered by the blood was saved. And that image just extends also onto Jesus. And I find that really cool.
Yeah.
Anyway, this is the last verse of Exodus 14, or the last 2 verses. This is how the Lord rescued Israel from the hand of the Egyptians. And the Israelites saw the bodies of the Egyptians washed up ashore. When the people saw the mighty power that the Lord had unleashed against them, they were filled with awe before him, and they put their faith in the Lord and his servant Moses.
That's great.
So it kind of, once they've been let out, again, we know it doesn't last long, their faith, but they were inspired by the work that God had done for them, and they were told to never forget. Again, they were told to do this Passover celebration every year on a specific time to remember what God had done for them.
I like that phrase. They were filled with awe, and they put their faith in God. And that's what's missing in Pharaoh, right? He was not filled with awe. And because he was not filled with awe, he did not put his faith in God. And that's what we see uncovered in that phrase of the hardening of the heart, because it actually says, before God says, I will harden Pharaoh's heart, the text tells us that Pharaoh hardened his heart toward God, and that's what we see in there, is that awe was actually lacking. He saw no need for God, and saw no need.
Instead of seeing the miracles in front of them that were happening, he just was angry at it.
Right, seeing each of the Egyptian gods knocked off one by one, but his response is still, I have no need of that God of yours, and we see the outcome.
That really tells us about our response to God. We can see God working in any number of places in our lives or in other people's lives. And if we've hardened our hearts against him, we're not going to be moved by it. We're not going to see it. And we're not going to allow it to work in our lives, allow it to soften our hearts. Right. So that's a huge, important thing, is don't harden your heart to the point where you don't see God at work.
Right.
All right. So I guess that leads to our final question. So how does the story of Moses and Pharaoh fulfill the rest of the story of God throughout the Bible?
Absolutely. Well, this is obviously the beginning of the law. So they're going to be led out of Egypt and into the promised land. And that's just the beginning of the fulfilling of God's promises to Abraham, and then to Isaac, and then to Jacob, and then to Moses and all his people. And again, the Passover that we said a couple minutes ago is really just pointing towards the salvation that comes through Jesus' death on the cross. And that's a huge picture, and that is just pointing.
To kind of circle back to Pharaoh and the hardening and stuff, like when we started recording, I noticed that, like, last week we talked about Hagar hearing God's voice, and it was a positive thing. He gave her a promise, and so there's a positive perspective of an outsider hearing God's voice. And in this instance, it's not so positive for
a warning
for Pharaoh, but that's the thing. It's a warning, and so it's just a reminder for those who don't know the Lord, and we may have listeners here who don't know Jesus. Jesus is trying to get your attention. God is trying to get your attention and to point you to Jesus, and you do well to pay attention to the ways that he is trying to grab a hold of your attention. And so as you see things unfolding in your life that might be pointing you to Jesus, it's good to respond to that. And also as believers, because there are times in our lives where things are happening around us, and they are meant to be pointing us to the ways that we are maybe not placing God on the throne where he belongs in our lives. And we need to pay attention to that and place him where he belongs in our lives. Have no other gods before me is the first of the law of Moses that we see given. So
like just an encouragement to take a look at your own heart and make sure it's not hardened. That's absolutely.
All right. Well, I guess that concludes today's episode. Thanks for listening.
Thank you so much. Hope to see you next week.
Great. Bye for now.